All right, I'm going to have Rabbi Bigman read from Leviticus, but I got to introduce her first. Maybe there's some things you didn't remember about her. But, yeah, she is the rabbi at Congregation Sherry Zedek, and been here quite a few years. She graduated from the University of Michigan. Don't hold it against her. Okay. And she was ordained as a rabbi at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Ohio. And she is also the founder and coordinator of the East Lansing Area Clergy Association. Plus, there are other things, but I think we ought to just let her get up here and tell us. All right. Rabbi.
Selections from Leviticus 19. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel and say to them, 'You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. You shall not steal, you shall not deal falsely, and you shall not lie to one another. And you shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not defraud your neighbor, you shall not steal, and you shall not keep for yourself the wages of a laborer until morning. You shall not revile the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am the Lord. You shall not render an unjust judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. With justice you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not profit by the blood of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate in your heart anyone of your kin. You shall reprove your neighbor, or you will incur guilt yourself. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." It's an honor for me to be back at Pilgrim Church. As Pastor Peter said, I've been here several times before, but really wonderful to be here again, and especially to be here with members of our congregation as well. I didn't know that there were people sitting over on that side. It's so nice to see you, because from where I'm sitting, all I could see were the folks over here. So nice to see all of you. I'd like to share a story with you this morning about an experience I had many years ago, with apologies to the members of our congregation who may have heard this story a few times already, but always when I look at this scripture, I remember this story. In the late 1990s, I was working part-time as the assistant director of the Ecumenical Institute for Jewish Christian Studies in Southfield, Michigan. Sadly, an organization that did such wonderful work and which no longer exists. And I also was working part-time at a synagogue, so I spent about half of my time in synagogue and about half of my time in church. My mother used to always find it very strange if I talked to her on Saturday evening, and I would say, "I have to go to bed early tonight because I have to get up early for church in the morning." And that just sounded wrong to her, that her Jewish daughter was getting up for church on Sunday. But be that as it may, I spent a lot of time speaking from pulpits around the Metro Detroit area. And I can still remember the very first time that I saw a framed poster on the back wall of a church. And I was standing at the podium just as I am now, and I looked in the back, and on that back wall there were many framed posters. And one of them said, Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Now, I looked at that, and my immediate reaction, my gut reaction was, well, wait a minute. That doesn't sound right. Jesus didn't say that. That's Jewish Bible, right? That's the beginning of Deuteronomy. Those first words come from Deuteronomy, and the last phrase from Leviticus. And I thought, well, this is so strange that Jesus is being given credit for quoting the Bible. And of course, then once that gut reaction was over, I realized, of course, for my own studies, yes, in rabbinic school, you can take an elective, at least it was an elective when I was there. I think it's a required course now. You can take an elective on New Testament. And then I stopped and thought about, of course, I knew that. I had just forgotten that story is told where Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment of all? And that's what he says. You can find it in the Gospel according to Mark, and also a version of it in the Gospel according to Matthew. And so here we are praying together today, as I was that day as well, in a congregational church, and looking at these words which are so central to Judaism and have become as important in Christianity. So on Friday evening, Pastor Peter focused on the Shema, and we decided that this morning I would focus on the Leviticus section, especially that last verse that I read from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow, as it's sometimes translated, or love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. The second part of that verse, love your neighbor as yourself, is one of the most quoted in the entire Tanakh, in the entire Jewish Bible. There are commentaries upon commentaries upon commentaries on this tiny little verse. Don't worry, I'm not going to share all of them with you this morning, just two. The first comes from what has become known as Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai's great debate. So Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai were sages of the first 2 centuries of the Common Era, what you might know as AD, and they wondered, what is the most important principle of the Torah? Similar, of course, to the question which Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment of all? Rabbi Akiva argued that it is the precept of you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But Ben Azai differed. He said, you must not say, since I have been put to shame, let my neighbor also be put to shame. For if you do so, know that you are shaming someone who is made in the likeness of God. So Ben Azai, while agreeing with Akiva's basic point, suggests another verse, which he claims contained an even greater principle of the Torah, of the Jewish Bible. And that is the phrase, Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam. This is the book of the generations of man. This verse comes from the very beginning of the book of Genesis, and it's a reminder to us that God created human beings in God's image. B'Tselem Elohim, we say in Hebrew. Ben Azai's words tell us that since humans are created in God's image, we are called upon to respect all human beings, regardless of their particular backgrounds. So according to this interpretation, Ben Azai is telling us, he's giving us, if you will, a universal vision of inclusiveness and commitment to humanity in general, not to just one group of humans, but to all humans. Not just to our own friends, our own neighbors, but to all who are created B'Tselem Elohim, in the divine image. And according to Ben Azai, this is an even greater principle than loving one's neighbor as oneself, in the sense that it enlarges our perspective and helps us view ourselves as part of the greater human family. Rabbi Michael Samuel sums up this debate between Ben Azai and Akiva in what he says more simple and more contemporary terms. He said, if you cannot respect the divine image that you are made in, the odds are that you will not be able to respect the divine image in others. Even if one were shamed, such disparaging treatment does not entitle the victim to reciprocate in kind, not even in the face of provocation. To insult or harm the divine image in any of its forms is to deny the essential brotherhood and sisterhood of humankind. And so this is why Ben Azai felt that the verse affirming the divine image is by far the most comprehensive principle of the entire Torah. Some would say it is the bedrock of all biblical morality. For Rabbi Akiva, love is the supreme value for interpersonal relationships. And that's an important teaching. For Ben Azai, the most important principle is divine equality. Respecting the godly image in oneself and in others ensures that society will be just and moral. Now, I have to say, I think that sounds really wonderful, not always so easy to put into practice. We have to take time sometimes. We might have to stop and maybe bite our tongue sometimes when we want to say something to or about someone else. And remember what that would feel like if something was said to us or if something was said about us. It's not easy. But according to Akiva and according to Ben Azai, this is how we have to live our lives. Pastor Peter taught a second commentary on this on Friday evening. And I'd like to share the same teaching. Now, I have to tell you something. I should backtrack for a second and say that we've had the great privilege at Shared Tzedek of having opportunities to do weekends like we're doing here with all of you at Pilgrim with other churches. And all but one time that I can remember, the pastor spoke on Friday and I spoke on Sunday. One time I got to speak on Sunday and the pastor spoke the Friday afterwards. But always I have written my sermon ahead of time, and then I go home, and on Saturday evening after our Sabbath is ended, I have to go back and look and say, oh yeah, that's what he said on Friday night. How do I make that different? And as Pastor Peter was saying to us on Friday evening, you know, that there's so much, I think you said it actually this morning as well, there's so much that we have in common. It's important to remember that. It's also very important to remember our differences. So when I heard on Friday evening Pastor Peter telling this to all of us, I thought, I'm pretty sure I had written that down too. So I just want to say it in a slightly different words maybe. It's a Hasidic interpretation of this text. And it says, in your love for your neighbor, you shall find God. It is through our empathic and caring relationships that we find God. And conversely, through our relationship with God, we are inspired to love and care for our fellow human beings. So, my friends, it is my hope and my prayer that as we conclude our pulpit exchange this weekend, that this will be just one of many opportunities for our two congregations to learn with and from each other, all while keeping in mind that we are made in the divine image and we are commanded to act as God would want us to do, as God would do. Keni Hiratzon, may this be God's will.